40 years of silence had settled over Veldris for like dust over a grave. The planet did not spin the way most worlds did. One side baked under a sun that never moved. The other side had not seen light in recorded history. Between those two extremes, a thin strip of land sat in permanent amber dusk, warm enough to breathe, dim enough to sleep, strange enough that most survey ships logged it as inhospitable and moved on. The UES Halverson did not move on. It was not a warship or an explorer vessel of any great fame. It was a mid-class survey craft with a crew of 11, a cargo hold full of scanning equipment, and a mission log that read more like a grocery list than an adventure. Grid by grid, system by system, they cataloged what the galaxy had left behind. Most days it was rocks and gas and the occasional dead moon. Veldris foreshowed faint biosignatures on the long-range sweep. Faint enough to ignore. The crew did not ignore them. Dara was the one who flagged it. She was the ship's medic and xenobiologist, a woman who had spent 12 years reading alien life signs the way other people read weather reports, not with excitement, but with a careful, practiced eye for what the numbers were actually saying. The numbers were saying something was alive down there. Not much, but something. Captain Wren brought the Halverson down. The landing site was in the Twilight Band, a flat stretch of pale stone surrounded by the ruins of what had once been a city. Not a small settlement, a city. The crew could tell by the scale of the broken walls, the width of the old roads now cracked apart by slow-growing stone moss. The archways still standing at heights that implied their builders had been very large indeed. Biosignature is coming from inside that structure, Dara said, pointing toward the largest remaining building at the center of the ruins. Its roof had partially collapsed. Its walls were carved from top to bottom with images, dragons in flight, dragons gathered in circles, dragons raising their heads to a sky that no longer looked the same. They walked in, all 11 of them, quiet, spread out, scanning. The hatchery was in the deepest room. They almost missed it because the light was so low and the room so wide. But then Olive, the ship's engineer, stopped walking and held up one hand. Everyone stopped. Everyone looked. In the center of the room, on a raised stone platform, lay 47 eggs. Each one was roughly the size of a human torso, pale as old bone, covered in a faint pattern of faded color that might once have been vivid. They were arranged carefully, nested against each other in a spiral pattern. And curled around them, wings folded flat, eyes reflecting the pale light of their helmet lamps, was a dragon. He was not as large as the ones carved into the walls. He was smaller, not small. Nothing about him was small, but compared to the massive figures in the murals, he looked young. His scales were the color of deep water, a blue so dark it looked almost silver in the lamplight. One wing had a small tear near the edge, healed over into a pale scar. His eyes were amber, fully open, watching them without moving. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then the dragon spoke first. His voice came out rough and low, like stone shifting against stone, but the words were standard, accented strangely, vowels stretched in unfamiliar places, but perfectly clear. "You are very small," he said. "I did not think your kind came this far out." Wren introduced the crew. The dragon listened without interrupting. When Wren finished, the dragon said his name was Soren, and that he was pleased to have visitors, as it had been some time. Dara stepped forward, careful, deliberate. She looked at the eggs. They were cold. She could feel it from 2 meters away. No warmth rising from the platform, no heat shimmer, nothing. She had expected, on some level, that a nest this size would radiate something. It did not. "These are yours?" she asked. "They belong to all of us," Soren said. "There is only me left now. But yes, I watch over them." "How long have they been like this?" Soren tilted his great head slightly. "Cold, you mean?" It was not a question. "Some years. The channels that warmed this room, the old vents that the builders kept clear, they filled with debris when the last of the adults were gone. I have not the tools or the size to clear them alone." He looked at the eggs for a moment, then back at Dara. "I intend to find a way. There are methods I know of, materials in the eastern ruins. I will begin when I have gathered what I need." Dara nodded. "When do you plan to start that?" Soren settled his chin back down onto the edge of the platform, amber eyes half closing with something that looked almost like comfort. "Tomorrow," he said. "I think tomorrow." Behind Dara, she heard Olive shift his weight. She heard Bryn. The young pilot, take a quiet breath. She said nothing herself. She just looked at the eggs, then at Soren, then back at the eggs. She filed the word away like a stone in her pocket. Tomorrow. She would come back to that word. She already knew she would. 3 days passed the way survey work always passed, slowly, carefully, with a great deal of walking and writing things down. The crew spread through the ruins of the old city in pairs, scanning and photographing and mapping. There was a great deal to document. The dragon city of Veldris, for had not been small. At its peak, based on the size of the roads and the number of the buildings still partially standing, Olive estimated it had housed several hundred individuals. Now it housed one. Soren moved through the ruins with the crew in the mornings, showing them things. He was a good guide. He knew which walls were safe to walk near and which were about to come down. He knew the names of the old districts, the Forge Quarter, the Record Hall, the nesting grounds farther east, and he spoke about them with the calm tone of someone describing a place they had loved for a very long time. Not sad exactly. Settled into the sadness the way old wood settles into a shape. He answered every question anyone asked him. He was patient with Olive's follow-up questions, which were numerous. He was patient with Bryn, who kept stopping to stare at things with open amazement and forget what she had been doing. In the evenings, Dara sat with him near the hatchery. She brought her scanner and her notebook. She asked him about dragon biology, about the eggs, about how the old warming channels had worked. He explained all of it with the same patient tone. The channels were cut from volcanic stone. They drew heat from geothermal pockets below the city and moved it through the floor of the hatchery. When kept clear, they maintained a constant temperature, enough to keep the embryos developing slowly through the centuries-long incubation that dragon eggs required. Could they be restored? Dara asked. Yes, Soren said. The design is simple. The material is not rare. I know where the blockages are, 3 main points in the channel network. The debris is heavy but not immovable. So what's needed is just the work, Dara said. Yes, Soren said. I will begin when I have gathered the right tools from the Forge Quarter. There were instruments there designed for exactly this kind of maintenance. I will go and find them. When? A pause. Tomorrow, I think. Dara wrote a small mark in her notebook. She did not say anything. That was the 11th time in 3 days. She had started keeping count on the first evening, almost without deciding to. Something about the word had caught her attention like a loose thread. By the second day, she was counting deliberately. 19 instances in 72 hours. Not always tomorrow, exactly. Sometimes it was soon, sometimes when conditions are right, sometimes before the next cold season. But the shape was always the same. A future action. A reasonable sounding delay. A door left open that was never walked through. On the third evening, she ran a quiet biological scan on the eggs while Soren was describing the mural on the far wall. She kept the scanner low and angled, trying not to make it obvious. She was not sure why she felt she had to be subtle about it. She just did. The results came back on her pad 20 minutes later. She read them twice. Then she excused herself for the night. Back in the Halverson, she sat at the small desk in the medical bay and looked at the data for a long time. The eggs were not dead. Every embryo she had been able to get a reading on showed dormant cellular activity, not growing, but not gone. Suspended. Waiting. But the temperature curve was a problem. The hatchery floor had been dropping steadily. She could see it in the historical data the ship's atmospheric sensors had been passively collecting since landing. At the current rate of decline, the embryos would reach a threshold point in approximately 4 to 6 weeks. Below that threshold, the dormancy would become permanent. The embryos would not die all at once. They would simply stop, one by one, too slowly to watch. She brought the data to Captain Rin the next morning. Rin looked at it for a long time. He was a careful man. He did not make decisions in the first minute if he could make them in the second. That is not a lot of time, he said finally. No, Doris said. And the dragon is aware of the situation. He knows the channels are blocked. I don't think he has thought about the math. Rin set down the pad. Dara, we are a survey crew. We document. We observe. We do not typically intervene in. I know what we are, Dara said. Rin looked at her steadily. Is there anything you want to say to me before I finish my sentence? Dara thought about Soren's voice saying tomorrow. She thought about the way he had looked at the eggs when he said it. Not hopeful. Exactly. More like someone looking at a door they believed was still open without ever checking the handle. Not yet, she said. I want to talk to him first. That night, she went to the hatchery alone. She sat across from Soren in the amber dark, the eggs pale and still between them, and she listened to him talk about the forge quarter and the tools he would need and the work he planned to do. She let him talk. She waited. She was already deciding how to ask the question. The right question. Not the angry version of it. Not the desperate version. The clean version. The one that had no exit. She almost had it. Soren had been talking for 20 minutes about the eastern drainage route when Dara stopped him. She did not raise her voice. She did not reach out or gesture. She simply said, quietly and without apology, "Wait." He stopped. He looked at her with his amber eyes, patient, unbothered. He was used to questions. The humans asked many of them. Dara set down her notebook. She looked at him directly. "You just said you would clear the main blockage before the next cold drop. Before that, you said you'd get tools from the forge quarter this week. And before that, 3 nights ago, you said you'd start gathering thermal stones tomorrow." She paused. That tomorrow was 4 days ago. Soren did not look away. He did not look uncomfortable either, which she had half expected. He just looked at her, calm as a stone. "I have been thinking through the best approach," he said. "These things take planning." "I know," she said. "I'm not arguing with that." She leaned forward slightly. "Soren, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it. Not the polite version. The real version." He tilted his head a few degrees. "All right. When you say tomorrow, what do you think actually happens then?" The silence that followed was not like normal silence. It had weight. It filled the room the way water fills a low place, slowly, from every direction. Soren opened his mouth, then closed it. He tried again. "I mean that I will, that the work will." He stopped. His great head lowered a few inches. The tip of his tail moved once against the stone floor. "I mean that there will be time." "Time for what?" "For the work." He stopped again. Longer this time. Dara waited. She was good at waiting. She had spent 12 years waiting for test results, for vital signs to stabilize, for answers to come back from labs light years away. She could wait longer than most people found comfortable. "You have said tomorrow many times since we arrived," she said, when the silence had gone on long enough that she was sure he was not going to fill it himself. "You said it about the tools. You said it about the channels. You said it about the thermal stones, about the drainage routes, about the survey of the blockage points." She kept her voice level. "Every time I ask when, the answer is tomorrow. So I am asking you." She let the question land carefully, like setting down something fragile. "What do you think tomorrow looks like? What happens in it?" Something shifted in Soren's face. She could not have described exactly what changed. Dragons did not have human expressions, but something behind his eyes moved, like a light changing direction. He started a sentence. "When the time is," he stopped. He started another. "Once I have properly," he stopped again. The third time he opened his mouth, nothing came out at all. Dara said nothing. She just watched him, not with impatience, with the same attention she gave to vital signs, reading, not pushing. When Soren finally spoke, his voice was different, lower. The roughness in it was still there, but something underneath it had gone hollow. "If I do not start," he said, slowly, "then tomorrow becomes the day after. And the day after becomes the week after. And the week," he stopped. His eyes moved to the eggs. He looked at them for a long time. "The eggs will not wait for me. I know this. I have known this." "How long?" Dara asked. "Since the 2nd year after the last adult was gone." He said it quietly. "I have known the channels needed clearing. I have known what would happen if they were not. I have known every step that needed taking." He paused. "I just kept the tomorrow. Because as long as I said it, the door was still open. As long as I said it, I had not yet failed." Dara was quiet for a moment. She understood that. She understood it in a way that did not require explanation or analysis. She had seen it before, not often, but enough. People who kept the plan perfect in their heads because starting it meant it could go wrong. "If you keep saying tomorrow," she said carefully, "what happens to the eggs?" His answer came out flat and certain, like something he had rehearsed in the dark many times and never let himself say out loud. "They die, one by one, too slowly to see. And then there are no more tomorrows to say because there is nothing left to say them for." "Yes," Dara said. He looked at her. She looked back. "So we start tonight," she said. "You and me. Not tomorrow. Right now. Tonight. We go to the forge quarter, and you show me where the tools are." She stood up, picked up her scanner and her notebook, and looked at him steadily. "And tomorrow, we bring the rest of the crew." Soren looked at her for a long moment. Then, with a sound like shifting stone, he unfolded himself from the platform, carefully, so as not to disturb the eggs, and stood at his full height in the amber dark of the hatchery. He did not say tomorrow. He said, "The forge quarter is northeast. Follow close. Some of the floors there are not safe." Dara followed. Behind her, the eggs sat pale and still on their cold platform, waiting the way they had waited for 40 years. But this time, for the first time, something was actually moving toward them. They found the tools at midnight. The forge quarter was on the northeast edge of the ruins, its roof long gone, its floor littered with decades of fallen stone and drifting dust. Soren moved through it without hesitation, stepping over rubble that came up to Dara's shoulder, pointing out the unstable sections by memory. In the back of the largest workshop, under a collapsed shelf that had protected them from the worst of the weather, they found what he had described: long-handled rods of volcanic stone fitted with heat-conducting caps, designed specifically for clearing geothermal channels. They were heavy. Dara could barely lift one alone. She lifted it anyway, got it balanced on her shoulder, and looked at Soren. "Can you carry the rest?" He could carry 11 of them in one armful without effort. They worked until the sky, such as it was on Veldris 4, a permanent soft amber, began to feel slightly less dark. Dara located the first blockage point with her scanner. Soren cleared it. The debris was compacted stone and mineral buildup, packed dense by decades without maintenance. It took 2 hours to break through the first one. By the time they walked back to camp, Dara's arms were tired from holding the scanner steady, and her boots were gray with ancient dust. She told the crew in the morning. She stood in the center of the Halversons' common room and laid it out plainly: the eggs, the temperature curve, the timeline, what she and Soren had found the night before, and what she thought needed to happen next. She did not dress it up. She gave them the numbers and let the numbers speak. When she finished, Ren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do we need?" Dara had her list ready. She handed it to him on her pad. Ren read it. He passed it to Olive, who read it with the focused expression he wore when he was already solving a problem in his head. Then Ren looked at the rest of the crew and said, "We have 4 weeks. Let's not use all of them." That was all. No committee. No long debate. Nobody asked whether it was in the mission parameters or what the UEA Xenospecies Authority would say. Soren was there. The eggs were there. The clock was running. 11 humans looked at the list and started moving. The thermal mapping drones were repurposed first. They were designed to measure heat differentials across large surfaces, which made them perfectly suited to function as low-output radiant heaters if Olive reconfigured their emitter arrays. It took him 6 hours. He did it while also eating breakfast, which impressed Bryn enormously. The reconfigured drones went into the hatchery and began laying warmth across the floor in slow, overlapping passes. The ship's mineral extractor was heavier work. It had been designed to pull coarse samples from rock, not clear underground channels, but the principle was close enough. Olive and 2 others spent the better part of a day modifying the extraction head, widening it, reversing the pressure direction. By evening, it could push debris out of a channel instead of pulling it up. Soren watched all of this with visible fascination. He had expected, Dara thought, to be left alone with a few helpful suggestions. Instead, he had 11 humans disassembling their own equipment and arguing cheerfully about the best way to repurpose it. He kept asking questions about what each modification was supposed to do. He kept listening to the answers with the careful attention of someone filing information away. Once, when a coupling broke on the extractor head and the 2 crew members working on it swore simultaneously in different languages, Soren tilted his head and asked, very seriously, if they were all right. They told him they were fine. He looked unconvinced but did not press it. It was Olive who noticed the murals. He had been moving through the hatchery with a lamp, checking the drone positions, when he stopped in front of the largest wall panel and stayed there for a long time. The image carved into it showed a dragon crouched over a small figure, a hatchling, with its wing extended, and around the wing were marks, patterns, lines that Olive had initially assumed were decorative borders. He called Soren over. He pointed. "What are these marks?" Soren looked at them. "Instructions," he said, as if this were obvious. "Instructions for what?" For the wing position, the angle affects heat retention. Different angles for different ages. Soren looked at the wall, then at Olive. The murals in this room are a guide for raising the young. Every stage, every need, every sign of health or trouble, it is all recorded here. The builders were very thorough. Olive stared at him. You knew this and never told anyone? Soren blinked his amber eyes slowly. No one asked. Olive got out his camera. He spent every spare moment after that photographing and cataloging the murals, asking Soren to translate the sections he could not read from the images alone. It turned out the instructions were extraordinarily detailed. Feeding schedules, behavioral markers for healthy development, thermal requirements by age bracket, everything a parent dragon would need and more. 36 hours after they started, the geothermal channels were clear. The heat came back into the hatchery floor slowly, rising through the stone like memory returning. Dara knelt on the platform beside the eggs and pressed her palm flat to the surface. It was warm, actually warm. She watched the scanner. The ambient temperature inside the hatchery was rising by 2 degrees every 4 hours. Not fast, but steady. Enough. On the second night after the channels were restored, she was sitting alone with the eggs at the end of her shift when egg number 12 moved. Not cracked, not split, just moved, a small, specific, intentional push from something inside. A tremor that lasted half a second and then stopped. She froze. She looked at the scanner. The reading was unmistakable. Soren was at the entrance to the hatchery. She did not know if he had been there the whole time. She looked up at him. 12, she said. He crossed the room and lowered his head until his nose was nearly touching the egg. He stayed there, very still, for a long moment. Then he said one word. Now. Not tomorrow. Not soon. Not when the time is right. Now. Dara wrote it in her notebook and underlined it twice. Egg number 12 hatched on a Tuesday. Nobody on Veldris 4 knew it was Tuesday except the Halverson's chronometer, which did not care about dragons, but kept perfect time regardless. The crew cared, because Bryn had started a small hand-drawn chart on the common room wall tracking which eggs were showing activity. And Tuesday was the day the first mark on the chart turned into a real hatching. The hatchling was small. They had expected small, but it was still startling. Barely the length of Dara's forearm, covered in damp iridescent scales that shifted color in the lamplight, making it look like something spilled and beautiful. It pushed out of the shell in stages, rested for 20 minutes, and then made a sound that everyone present agreed later was somewhere between a shriek and a hiccup. Soren went absolutely still. He stared at the hatchling the way a person stares at a fire, unable to look away, afraid to move in case it goes out. Over the next 9 days, 30 more hatched. Not all of them. Dara kept her own tally, separate from Bryn's chart, and she did not hide the numbers. 16 eggs did not open. 2 opened, but the hatchlings inside had not survived the decades of cold. Dara sat with each broken shell for a moment before she moved on to the next. She recorded the losses the same way she recorded the living ones, with the same handwriting, the same notation, the same care. She did not cry in front of anyone, but she was not as good at hiding the set of her jaw as she thought. 31 hatchlings survived. They were chaos. They were hungry constantly and loud about it. They climbed things. They climbed Olive specifically, because he was closest to the ground and had the right frequency of calm patience that hatchlings, apparently, found attractive. By the 3rd day, he had developed a practiced method of detaching small clawed feet from his jacket without startling the attached dragon. He was very good at it. It was unclear whether to find this funny or impressive. Most of the crew settled on both. Dara and Soren sat together one evening while the hatchlings slept in a warm pile near the heat drones. The drone hummed low and steady, the amber dark around them soft and quiet. You cannot raise them alone, Dara said. No, Soren agreed. He did not say it like a defeat. He said it like a fact he had already examined and placed correctly on the shelf. I cannot. The planet cannot support them as it is. The old food grounds would need clearing. The water channels would need work. There are things here that would take decades to restore, and he paused. I am one. I'm going to flag this planet, Dara said. When we leave, I'm submitting a Class A preservation request to the UEA Xenospecies Authority. Full report, full documentation, everything Olive has photographed and translated. It will go in as urgent. Soren looked at her. How long does that process take? She was quiet for a moment. She owed him honesty. It moves slowly. The bureaucracy is not built for speed. Months, maybe. Possibly close to a year. Will they come? Yes, she said. She was certain of that. A surviving dragon species on a recoverable world. That would not be ignored, not once it was in the system. They will come. He was quiet for a while. And in the meanwhile? 3 of us are staying, she said. Olive, Bryn, and Sela. They volunteered. Soren looked at her carefully. I did not ask. I know, she said. They didn't wait to be asked. He said nothing for a moment. The hatchlings made small sounds in their sleep. Tiny clicking sighs, the occasional twitch of a wing barely the size of a hand. 31 of them, nested against each other like a single breathing thing. What do your people gain from this? Soren asked. He was not suspicious when he asked it. He was genuinely curious. The same way he was curious about Olive's modifications and Bryn's chart, and the way humans argued with each other while still clearly agreeing on the thing that mattered. He wanted to understand the shape of the reasoning. Dara thought about it for a real moment. Not a polite thinking pause. An actual one. We get to say we were here when it mattered, she said finally. Soren considered this. That is a strange reason. Yes, she said. But it's ours. He let out a breath that was not quite a sigh and not quite a rumble, something in between, and she had learned enough about him by now to understand it as something close to acceptance. That night, Olive brought out the translation notes he had made from the murals and sat with Soren for 3 hours, working through the naming section. Dragon names were not given randomly. They were built from a set of root sounds that carried meaning, assembled in specific ways for specific purposes. With Soren correcting his pronunciation every few minutes, patiently, repeatedly, with the air of someone who found the errors charming rather than frustrating, Olive gave each of the 31 hatchlings a proper name. The last one took longest because Soren kept making Olive repeat the tonal shift on the second syllable. By the time they got it right, Bryn had fallen asleep at the table and 2 of the hatchlings had climbed onto Olive's shoulders and gone to sleep there as well. Soren said the name correctly 3 times in a row to confirm it. And then, for the first time since the crew had landed on Veldris 4, he laughed. It sounded like a rock slide. It filled the whole hatchery chamber and bounced off the carved walls and rolled out into the amber dark of the ruins beyond. Every hatchling woke up immediately and started making noise. Bryn jolted awake and knocked over her chair. Dara, who had been writing in her log at the other end of the room, put down her pen and smiled at the ceiling for a long moment before picking it back up. Physics had never cared about dragons. The Halverson's transit window opened 48 hours after the last hatchling received its name. The ship's navigation system had been flagging the countdown for a week. Quiet, patient, the way machines were patient, without sentiment. Missed the window by more than 12 hours, and the gravitational geometry of this part of space would push the return journey from 3 weeks into 3 months. Wren had 7 other survey targets on the mission list and a crew that had families. The window was not a preference. It was the shape of the universe. Dara had known it was coming. She had not looked at the countdown clock for the last 4 days. The morning of departure, she went to the hatchery alone, early, before the crew began the packing down process. The 31 hatchlings were awake and moving. They were always awake and moving now, which was its own kind of relief after the stillness of 40 years. 2 of them noticed her immediately and came scrambling across the warm floor to investigate her boots. She stood still and let them. Soren was at the far end of the chamber, watching her. She walked over. The hatchlings followed for a few steps and then got distracted by each other. How do you feel? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. I feel, he said slowly, as though I have been holding my breath for 60 years, and someone finally told me I was allowed to exhale. Dara looked at the hatchlings. One of them was attempting to climb the carved mural wall with complete confidence and no particular skill. Another one was sitting very still in the middle of the floor, staring at the ceiling, for reasons that were entirely its own. Olive will stay close to the mural notes, she said. He has everything organized. Sela has been cataloging the Twilight Band plants all week. She thinks some of them can be cultivated for food once the hatchlings are big enough. And Bryn will. She paused. Bryn will hover and ask questions and be excited about everything. And honestly, that might be what they need most right now. She has named 4 of them already, Soren said. Her own names. in addition to the proper names. I know. I saw the list. She named one of them Trouble. It is accurate, Soren admitted. Dara smiled. She looked at him directly. Will you be all right? He was quiet for a long moment. Not the hesitating quiet she had learned to read in those first days. Not the tomorrow-shaped quiet. This was a different kind. Thinking quiet. Honest quiet. I do not know, he said. I have not been all right for a very long time. I am not sure I remember the exact shape of it. He paused. But I believe I am learning to remember. She nodded. She had not expected a cleaner answer than that, and would not have trusted one. I am going to ask you something before I go, she said. And I would like the real answer, not the polite one. He looked at her with his amber eyes, and there was something in them that had not been there when they arrived. Not exactly warmth, because he had always been warm, but something more open, less carefully closed. You said you stopped saying tomorrow, she said. What word did you replace it with? He looked at the hatchlings for a moment. At the warm floor, the restored channels, the murals on the walls, the three humans across the room who were already beginning to pack their personal things into bags, and were doing it loudly, and with some disagreement about whose bag was whose. Now, he said. She picked up her bag. Good. She stopped at the entrance to the hatchery and looked back once. Soren had already turned toward the hatchlings. One of the small ones had climbed onto his lowered head and was sitting there with enormous satisfaction. He was pretending not to notice, but the very careful way he was holding still gave him away entirely. She walked out into the amber morning and did not look back again. On the ship, once they were in orbit and the planet was a pale curve below them, Dara opened her log and wrote one line. 31 dragons. One word. Not a bad day's work. She closed the log. She looked out the viewport until Veldris 4 was the size of a coin, then a point of light, then nothing she could separate from the rest of the stars. Olive's first field report from the surface arrived 11 hours later, already 3 pages long, with photographs and a vocabulary list, and a footnote explaining that one of the hatchlings had eaten part of his scanner, and he was fairly sure this was developmental and not a sign of anything wrong, but he was monitoring the situation. Dara read it twice and forwarded it to Run without comment. 11 months after the Halverson departed Veldris 4, the UA Preservation Fleet arrived. 4 ships, a full xenospecies team, equipment for long-term habitat restoration, and one very confused cultural archivist who had never worked with a living subject before and was overwhelmed by the first 10 minutes. Their initial sensor sweep returned 1 adult dragon biosignature and 31 juvenile biosignatures, all within the hatchery zone. All active, all stable. The follow-up report, filed 6 hours after landing, noted that the juveniles were in excellent health, well socialized, highly curious, and extremely loud. It also noted that 3 humans were present on the surface and appeared to have been there for some time and were deeply reluctant to leave. The archivist described the hatchlings as extraordinary. He described Soren as dignified, precise, and somewhat overwhelming in close quarters. He described Olive as a man who had clearly been adopted. All 32 dragons were alive. All 32 were moving. The planet that had held its breath for 60 years was breathing again, slow and steady, in the amber light of its permanent dusk. Tomorrow, on Veldris 4, had become now. And now, it turned out, was more than enough.